Hello and welcome to stream number 82 in this series where I am programming an NES game live on Twitch from scratch. Let's continue. Last stream we had made some changes so that when we create our sprites we have the ability to identify the palettes that are in use. For the different sprites that are, they are sprites, right, because they're 8x8, but the different tiles specifically that are part of a PNG that we're loading. And so what we had done, for example, is we had taken this image and split it into the 3 tiles and made it so that we could take the different palettes and export them as different files and then specify that in the JSON so that we have the ability to pass that in every time we re-export the sprite. And so we have, for example, if we go back to the player sprite, we have the ability to specify that when we re-export it, we have this sprite position thing here. One thing we don't have right now is we don't have the collision points. We should debug why that's not working, because that seems to be causing a crash when we try to look at the collision points. And I think it's because it's adding collision points even though it shouldn't be. Let's take a look at that here. So let's open up a command line and debug, yeah. So what I want to be able to do is add that collision point that we just added. NES asset tool, PNG to sprite, player.png, and then player.json, and that will re-export the sprite, and then that will give us this. And then if you recall, we need to swap around the background color, situation. Let's see, is it that one? Yeah, and then we can change the color there to that. Change this to that. Or not, because it seems to crash when we do this. It's weird. I don't know what is causing that. It's a very odd problem. So let's do this. Let's change this and then change this to that. And then that light gray. So that actually, now that I'm looking at this, there's another interesting problem we're running into here with the secondary palette having elements of these. Well, no, wait a minute. Why? How is... Yeah, okay. So what it's doing is it's looking at these colors and then matching them to this, which is not going to work. But the other problem is this whole collision point thing. Let's debug this first. So why is this adding sort of an unending number of collision points? 51. Alright, so let's see why it's adding so many collision points. If sprite selected and viewing collisions, but I didn't click on the image, why does it think that I did? Viewing collisions, number of collision points, 51. Is it 51 to start out with? Let's take a look. Is it just something that got uninitialized and saved? View collision points, number of collision points, 2. So there are 2. And then there's 3. And then there's 4. So is it going into either of those? No. What is adding? Oh, wait. What is this? If sprite selected. Oh, there's this code here. If you this is no. If checkbox. This doesn't need to be here. So let's see if that fixes that problem. Because it's, as soon as we turn on the viewing of the collisions, it seems like it was adding more and more collision points. It looks like that's where that was coming from. And we hadn't looked at it in other streams just because it wasn't super important at the time. We could kind of bypass it. So there's just the one now. There it is. Okay, so I can... Okay, so that's cool. All right, that fixed that problem. Now the only other thing is we have to see, basically, if we are attempting to add a collision point, the first thing we should do is see if it's there already, and if it is, remove it. Well, I don't really have the patience to implement that right now, because that means we're going to have to shuffle around counts and stuff like that. Let's just re-export this. And that should... Okay, good. So that's that, and we can add a couple more for our background collision, and that's good. And then now what we need to do is we need to fix the fact that the background is, or that the way that it's allocating the colors is based on it's based on both palettes being loaded at the same time, and there's no real understanding of the fact that these are essentially two logical things. And so if it wants to use that color, it has to do so within the confines of these tiles. It has to be in this first palette in order for that to work. Because you can't mix and match, right? So let's see here. How are we going to do that? Because right now, well, a couple of things we can do. The first thing we can do is we can, well, I hate that we're going to spend more time on this, but I don't know that it can be helped because I really want to get this fixed. Because the problem is that then we're going to have to fix this manually every time we deal with another sprite type. So right now what's happening is we're loading the image and then we're converting it to indexed. Based on the NES palette, and then we're loading the image palette based on what's in use, but we're not taking into account the position of the image versus the tile that it's in. So What we really need to do is when we go through the process of figuring out our So do we have to do it one tile at a time based on the tile positions and then formulate the different palettes? If we Sorry, I'm pondering this one because I'm not sure how we solve it per se. Like, we have the ability to take our 8x8 tiles and for each of them formulate a single 4-color palette that way. And the issue is that this is a little more complicated than I wanted it to be. I guess there's really no helping that, though, because ultimately we have to consider the image based on the tile positions, and then we have to, so we have to consider it based on the tile positions and then formulate the different palettes, and then if the palettes are the same, we can merge them so that we conserve which palettes we're using. If we provide the palettes ahead of time, then we just basically, when we generate PNG to when we go from PNG to the tile sets, we just use them as is what it sounds like. With the idea being that the art is created sort of conscious of what the palettes are. There's really no way around that. So what it looks like I need to do is, let's move this out here. For a second. Just make this a pointer and allocate it if we need it. So sprite pointer initial sprite equals null, and then initial sprite equals malloc size of sprite. Set initial sprite 0 size of sprite. And that has to be a sprite pointer cast. Okay, so I spelled it wrong here. Initial sprite, and then what's nice about this is at least then at the bottom we're only we're passing initial sprite as a pointer. So if it's null, we don't use it when we call create sprite. That just removes one branching path there. All right, so at this point, we're going to load the sprite metadata. Here we're going to load the image. And the reason that I want this here is because I want the initial sprite passed in. Actually, wait, not there. I want it there. And the reason I want it that way is because if it's got a value, then we know that we are going to use the palettes from the tile position structure. And if it doesn't, then we know we are going to make use of just a, we're just going to grid it out 8 by 8 across the whole image. So what that means then is that we kind of want a version of this that we can pass an X and Y to, where we say, okay, for this image, given an arbitrary X and Y, calculate how many colors there are, and then figure out if there are too many, right? Because that can't exceed 4. So that's pretty easy. So we'll call it load image palette also, but it'll take the tiger image, it'll take our palette destination, it'll take our palette count, and it'll take an int X and Y, right? In fact, let's just make this a UN8, UN8. Okay, so that gives us what we're looking for here. And then we're going to basically adapt what we have here to do the same sort of thing, but just for that smaller bit of the image. And then what we have to do is, once we have that determined, we want to look at the palettes that we've created and see if they're the same. And if we exceed 4 different palettes of 4, then we want to throw an error, basically. So let's take this basic code here. This part. Right, so we're going to iterate through the image, and instead of doing it through the entire image, we're going to instead go for in Y, UN8, Y equals 0. Y is less than, it's SY. Y is less than SY plus 8, plus SY, Y, and then okay, so that is that. So now we're iterating over the image here. And it's just X plus Y times image width, right? And that gives us our color map. So now we know we're dealing with only a palette size of 4 in this particular case, and we're going to iterate from 0 to 63 and attempt to count the colors. And if we exceed 4, then the max color count is exceeded and we are in trouble. And what we want to do is we want to say color count, no, palette count equals color count, and return max color exceeded. Now, bool max color exceeded. And then what we want to do here is if initial sprite, we're going to iterate over the tile positions, otherwise iterate over image. And then what we also need to do is this part here where we convert the, or we generate the indexed image. We'll take care of that in a second. But so let's do this. So for this one, it's easy, right? We say for uint 8, I is equal to 0. I is less than initial sprite tile number of tiles plus I, and then we are going to just call load image palette destination. I know this is wrong, so just bear with me here. So, and then it's initial sprite positions I X initial sprite positions I Y. And this should be capitalized. Okay, and then what's wrong with this? This is, oh, position X, position Y. Although actually, if we have a palette file, maybe we ignore this. We don't do this, we just use the palette. That might be a better thing to do. Assuming that palette is right. Yeah, let's get rid of this for a second. Just loading palette files. All right. So for this one, y is less than image height, y plus equals 8. X equals 0, x is less than image width, x plus equals 8. So we're just doing it 8 at a time. All right, we're doing it one tile at a time here, and we're calling this guy with x and y. Again, I know this is wrong, so just bear with me here. I just want to flesh out the basic idea. My nose is itchy. It's dry. Cold weather. That's why I'm wearing this thing. It's cold in the basement. All right, so, what we need to do, though, at this point is we need to load the palette and then compare it to existing palettes, and if it's not the same, then we can put it into the overall master palette that we're going to have of 16 possible, well, 12 colors plus the background position for all of them. But if we... trying to think of what's the best way to do that here. Bearing in mind that we also have to take into account that the positions are potentially going to be different because we're not sorting it. Maybe we should... well, if we sort it... oh, well, actually, maybe we are sorting it because... yeah, we are sorting it by value just by virtue of the way that we're doing this, this color check that we're doing. So we're iterating over the image and accumulating the colors into this uint64. And then we're incrementing over the uint64 in order to generate our palette. So the colors that are in use will automatically be an increasing value. So if the palettes are the same, they should be pre-sorted. So the only situation we might run into is that the palettes are a different number of colors. Like the initial palette we created was 4 colors, and then the next one was only 2, but that should be okay. I feel like that would be okay because then we would get into a situation where... let's think about this for a second. So if we are generating... if we're generating a set of palettes, we have one palette that, let's say, is only 2 colors because it's a very simple thing, and then we have another palette that we come in that's 4 for the 4 colors in use, and these 2 are the same. It wouldn't match because these 2 are not used. So what we can do is kind of mark these as being unused rather than 0. And by doing that, then this will match those, and then we'll just have one full complete palette that comprises the 4 colors we need. I think that will work. The only thing is that we have this set up as uint. So let's do this. Let's make that an int8. And the reason that I want to do that is because I want to set them to be -1 if they're not used. We'll fix that when we go to copy it over to the final palette, but that's going to be sort of our wild card that we use to determine if the palettes match, right? So let's see. So this is an int8 temp palette 4 equals -1. I think we can do that. And then temp palette, right? And then what we want to do is I is less than 4 plus I. We'll just do a a simple comparison against the palette destination where we look and see if it exists already in any of the palettes that we've found. So we need something called palette count. So this should actually be palette count. And if not palette found, we're just going to do a straight let's create a array here, because similarly, if we end up with palettes without the some colors being initialized, what we can do is then determine what the appropriate with pointer we can set a default color so that we can see that they're unused, and that'll be helpful too. So let's see. So we'll iterate through the use palette count, and then if it's not found, what we'll do is we'll do a mem copy from into what is it called? Final palette, from temp palette, and there'll be a size of 4 times size of int 8, and then this should actually be into palette, what is it called? Used palette count times 4. And that's the address of that. And then we will say used palette count plus plus. Okay, so that will copy it in and get us to our next one. And then what we want to do in here is we just want to say, okay, if we're gonna unroll. We could do yet another loop, but because it's only 4, we're just gonna unroll this. So we're gonna say if let's see. So temp palette 0 equals let's do it just for the first case, and before I start trying to unroll all of this right at once. Let's see. So if temp palette 0 is equal to used final palette 0, or let's say right, if it's not equal to that, then, well, no. So if it's equal to this, or final palette 0 is equal -1, so that's that first one. And we'll do that again for the next one, right? So if they're either equal to each other, or this one is a -1, which means it's the wild card, and then we just keep going. And that's that. That's the end of that one. Then we say found equals true and break, and that goes away. Oh, palette found. Okay. So that's our matching, and then the only thing we would need to do is otherwise, if final palette 0 equals -1, trying to think what's the, because for the, so if we've matched with wildcards, right, we've said if the temp palette is equal to the final palette 0, and this index obviously is wrong, so we'll fix that in a second, but if the temporary palette is equal to this one, or the final palette 0 is -1, which means it's the wild card, then we consider that to be a match. And we do that for all 4, and then we have to essentially how do we can we make this a little bit more compact here? I guess if it's equal to this, or this is equal to -1, we don't want to just do a full copy because, oh, actually, we have to check both of them, right? We have to check, is final palette equal to -1, or is temp palette 0 equal to -1? That was the other part of this that we didn't check. So it's ugly, but it saves us having to do yet another internal loop, although at 3 loops, kind of like, who cares, I guess? I don't know. But the point is that it's simple enough that we can do that, and then depending on, I guess we just have to do right, we're saying if this is -1, actually, let's say final palette so in this case, if they're both -1, we end up with -1. Otherwise, if final palette is -1, then we end up with temp palette. We don't care what ends up in temp palette. Right? And then the only other thing that we need to fix is that this should be I, and this should be I plus 1, I plus 2, I plus 3, and actually this should be I plus equals to 4, because we're iterating through. This is kind of gross, but I'm not sure, other than, like I said, kind of making a whole loop out of it, I'm not sure what else we could do. And then this is just I plus I I plus 1, I plus 2, I plus 3, I All right, maybe we'll figure out a way to make this a little more elegant later, but basically if either one of them is -1 or they match, then we will consider that a win. And then if we fall into there, we will take whichever one is not -1 if the final palette is -1. And then mark it as found. Because we don't care about the unused colors in the source, we care about it in the destination. All right, so that's that. Let's take a look at what that looks like if we just take the PNG directly. I want to see, because this is a little ugly. I'm not feeling super confident in it. All right, so let's take a look at what we got here. A compile error. Oh, right. Yeah, so let's just ignore this part for a second. Load image palette. Oh, no, overload takes 3. Load. Oh. No. Okay. Actually, we can make that a default parameter. I just didn't want to do that initially when we were implementing this. Okay. So we're just going to iterate through, and this is just going to give us a palette based on the first tile that's in the corner, and we have -1, 0B, 1, 0, 2, 0. So what we're basically saying is that we've got 3 colors, with the first one being essentially a wild card, which is fine because we always skip the first one because we know that it has the background color and we don't really actually care what that is, right? So that's fine. So now the palette wasn't found, so we are going to copy that into Final Palette. Okay, good. What's not good is Final Palette. It's weird that it didn't initialize Final Palette to -1. did I do a mem? No, that, Does it only work for 0 initialization? I would have thought it could do that for... All right, well... Here, let's do this. I want that part working as it will. So memset final palette 0, sorry, -1 size of final palette. Okay, let's try that again. Does your asset tool differentiate between background tiles and sprites? Each has different palettes they can use. Background tiles, a single set of 4 colors. Meta tiles need to consider the attribute table. Yeah, so it's splitting between sprites and background tiles right now. I'm focusing on sprites because the meta tiles are designed to not use more than one set of palettes. It's just the one palette of 3 colors, at least at this point. So, but the good news is the stuff that I'm working on for the sprites to be able to use multiple palettes would work for the meta tiles too, because ultimately it's the same code. It's just not being processed that way for the meta tiles right now. All right, so we've got our image palette. And then we're doing our copy into final palette, which is now initialized to -1 correctly. Okay, so we've increased our used palette count. So now we're going to get the next block. So X is 8. And okay, cool. So now we go through and we look at, all right, is there a match here? Let's take a look at the colors. We've got -1, 11, 16, and 32. 11, 16, and 32. So it's the same colors. So it should match here. The palette was found. Good. And then that's it for X. And then for Y, we get three colors here. And that's not right. Temp palette, final palette, I is 0, or final palette is equal to -1, or temp 0. Oh. It's the only problem with doing something like this where you're unrolling things is that sometimes you do it wrong. Okay, so now let's go through this whole thing again. I've skipped the first set of 2 tiles. We're in the next row of the image here. So let's see. It shouldn't match anything. So not palette found. Copies our next set of colors. And this should match the second palette we found. But it didn't. Why? Use palette count 2. No, this isn't using CC65. This is a separate tool that I'm building outside of the NES. I'm using CA65 for the actual game code here. But this is an asset tool that I'm working on, Woodsy Mammal, for converting the assets over from PNG to the NES. All right, so why didn't that match? The first time through that shouldn't match because the final palette doesn't have it in there. So we mem copy it, and that's fine. And then we go through the first palette. It does not match. Why? Did I actually even go to 2? Or 1, rather? Stop. Okay, so... Okay, that's their second set of colors. It doesn't match. What is I equal to here? So I is this, I is 0, and used palette count is 1. Oh, it's 1. Why isn't it 2? What happened? Oh, is this the first time y is 8, x is 0? Okay, so this is the first time through that tile set. Okay, so now I is 0, and then it just skips. Oh, because that was dumb. Times 4. That's why. That was silly. Two. All right. Sorry about that. It was because I was not adjusting for the fact that we're indexing into an array of 16 properly. All right, so it was skipping the next palette, and there we go. So now it's found it, so it thinks we've only used 2 palettes, which is good, and now we're done with the image. Okay, so that part's working now. Good. All right, so now that we've got the number of palettes established, we've got our, we end up with our final palette that we can use to convert the image to the indexed palette. Now, the problem with the way we were doing it before is that we were looking at the total palette for all the tiles, and what we actually have to do is we have to, with each one, we have to take the image and convert it to the indexed version after we've assembled a palette that will work, so that it's consistent, so that we don't have what we were doing before. I don't have a drawing or anything for it, but basically what we were doing before is you'd have the 16 colors in your palette, and then it was choosing whichever ones match, which won't work because they have to be the 4 together. So after we've done this, now we can convert the image to the indexed version. So now what we want to do is what we were doing here, but with temp palette. And we could think about how we want to do this, because we're traversing this already for the purposes of generating this palette. Well, I guess we'll just traverse it again. Again, There's part of me that looks at this and goes, this is horribly inefficient. Why are we doing it this way? But at the same point, it's like this is something that you're going to run as part of the build process. It doesn't have to be super efficient. It just has to work, and trying to figure out ways to make this run super efficiently is sort of a waste of time unless we find that it's so slow that building becomes cumbersome, which it shouldn't, because this is such a simple system to build for. It's not like it's going to take an hour or two to build the game, like in a real production environment for a game or a product. So look away if you're weak-stomached, but we're just going to write another internal loop to iterate over the 64 pixels here. So we'll call this IY for internal Y. Image, let's see, we'll make this Y plus, Y plus 8. IY for int 8. That's one of those things where I really try not to spend too much time optimizing code where it doesn't matter, because there's always a temptation to try and make this run in the most efficient way possible, but if it's not something that's going to be running in the actual update loop of the game or in the drawing routines of the game, again, unless it becomes a bottleneck that's preventing you from moving forward with the game, it's not really something we need to spend too much time optimizing. Even this, in retrospect, this whole comparison thing probably is unnecessary and a little ugly. But given that it's just 4 things, it's not like 64 items. It's not that big a deal. So it's not that big a deal to write it this way. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to take the tile and index it based on the palette we have. Actually, what I want to do is I want to call a function here, and the reason I want to do that is because we're going to need to use it up there when we have the palettes that we're going to be using. So let's just take care of that right now. So index image tile, we have the image, we have the X, the Y, and the temp palette, which is our current palette. Or actually, let's use final palette because technically that's the right one to use. Oh, I don't know. I don't actually know which palette index it found that's the right one. So let's fix that too. Found palette index equals -1. And let's say equals I, and this will be found palette index is equal to used palette count. So basically the one that we just copied it into is the one that we want to use as our palette that we're gonna select our index values from. So use palette, no, found palette index, and then we actually have to define this. So let's do that. Void, what did I call it? Index tile, image tile. X, Y. pointer. Oh, this should be SX and SY. Y is less than SX, oops, plus 8. And then do this for X. Okay, and then we just say image indexed SX plus SY times image width equals, wait, how did we do that here? Okay, we have to find for I is equal to 0, I is less than 4, plus plus I. Palette I is equal to image fix I. So we had already converted the actual, oh, I'm sorry, no. This is, we had already converted this to be indexed, but now we need it to be indexed based on the palette that we're using here. So what we want to do is say palette I, and then break. Because we're done, we found the color. So yeah, so we're re-indexing the originally, we had converted the RGB values into the Nintendo 64 color range, and then now we are re-indexing these to be a value from 0 to 3 within the palette that we are actually interested in using for that sprite. So there's that. So in theory, I think that's right. So let's take a look. So let's see, 0 and 0. So now we're just going to iterate through, and palette should be equal to, yep. So if we get a match, then we will change the image index value to palette, the palette value. So let's take a look at this for a second. So image, yep, that's what we actually want to look at. So we have 0b as the value, and that's index 1 here. So now we're going to change that value to be, oh. This is why I like to check things frequently, because I make stupid mistakes. All right, let's try that again. So, image indexed, and this is palette. Why did it not change the first one? Maybe it did in the memory addresses. Let's see. No, it didn't. Because this is wrong. All right. Let's try that again. Wow, batting 1,000 here. It helps if I am consistent across the board on how that gets calculated. All right, try this again. There we go. All right, so now we're just going to re-index the whole thing. So let's step out. And it went through, and what didn't it? Oh, okay, and it only did it for that one tile that we were looking at, which is right. So now, when we go through for the next tile, it'll do the same thing with the same palette that it had already, which is palette 0. And we should get the same sort of results. Okay, good. So this is all looking good now. And then what we need to do is we need to copy final palette over to palette destination, but with the caveat that we want to iterate over the entire list of the final palette, and say that if final palette I is equal to -1, then we'll make it equal to E0, which is one of the black colors that the NES supports. Otherwise, we will just leave it alone. And then we will finally memcopy that to palette destination, final palette, size of UN8 times palette size. And then that will give us a palette that doesn't have any negative values in it anymore, but should be also normalized to just 2, and and it should be consistent across the board, across the tiles. Yeah. Okay, good. So that's looking good because we're getting our B and 10 and 20, and then 0 and 4 and B, and then the rest are E0 as expected. So that actually looks reasonable. And then if we go and look at the folder, we can look at the palette files, and open the wrong screen. Look at the palette files that it created here, these 2 palette files. One thing that it was doing before is it was actually creating 3 palette files, I believe. Good, and that's looking consistent across the board. So let's now export the sprite to a JSON file again, so that we can. Okay, good. So this, let's make these relative, because I don't care about these being absolute. And then we also need to fix this because, like we talked about in previous streams, the player is actually 3 8x8s, not 4. So that needs to be fixed there. And then we use palette 0 for that. Let's see what that looks like if we load that up. All right, so interesting. So what, let's take a look at what got done there. So it's not 100% right, and I think it's because we didn't actually, oh yeah, that's right, because we didn't actually do this process with the existing palettes from the sprite definition itself, which that doesn't work. Okay. So couple things. Oh, well, actually, even more so than that. So that's interesting. So I didn't actually... Never reconverted it. That's the first thing, and then we never finished this part. And so in order to finish this part, what we want to do is we want to, for each tile, call index image tile with the palette that gets loaded. So I actually don't need to do this part. I just say index image tile image sprite positions I, position X, initial sprite, sprite positions I, position Y. Hey, Bunchaku. And then loaded palette. So load palette. No, load. What is it? Is it... How are we loading the palette file? Are we just reading it directly? I mean, it's certainly simple enough to do. No, we're calling load palette on the sprite. Oh, okay. Right. All right. I forgot. So we can... So it has a palette already loaded in it. You know what we need to do when we load so that's interesting. I hadn't considered that. So when we load the sprite position, sprite position just has a position and a palette name. It has nothing to define what the palette index is, which is only important to this process, I think. Because, let's see, is that right? Is it only important to this process? Because I think what we do when we draw the image is we use the appropriate palette based on or are we just using literally the indexed image as is? We are... We're just converting it directly, which is also not correct. Okay. Well, let's fix that. So this doesn't really need to be saved anywhere. It's not useful information, but it is useful for when we load the sprite. Or let's see, let me make that uint 8. Because when we go to load the sprite, we determine if it's a duplicate palette, and then if it is, we don't reload it. Otherwise, we store. All right, so if it's already there, then what we need to do is we need to say for positions I, palette index is equal to J. Otherwise, positions I palette index is equal to palette index divided by 4. So we've got our palette index properly calculated. And then when we go to draw the sprite, that's the problem. You make these changes and you get cascading changes you got to do. Will the palette become another asset you can make in the tool with the intention of adding it to the ROM so it can be placed in the BPU to replace one of the hardware? So yeah, basically the palettes will be interchangeable with the idea that once we have a set of palettes that work for, say, enemies, you'll be able to just specify them in sort of these metadata definitions of the sprites. And then, and the same thing with the meta tiles, I guess, eventually. And then, yes, you will also in here be able to define sets of palettes that you can invoke a load call into the PPU. Not there yet. I'm just trying to get the sprite part of this working. So, all right. So it's not just... Oh, wait, really? Palette 0... NES palette. Let's... Oh, okay, it's initializing the background color. And then, all right, so then what we're doing is we're taking the palette image index, and then what we need to do is we need to say sprite positions I palette index times 4 plus right, because that's going to give us the starting point of the palette plus the actual image color converted to the palette offset of the 0 to 64 for the NES, and then over to an actual RGB value, and then the indexed value is the same. That doesn't change. Loaded palette is undefined. Okay, so now going back to here, when we load the sprite metadata with the initial sprite, we have a sprite palette that's loaded. And what we want to do is we want to take initial sprite palette. This is initial sprite positions I palette index times 4, and then this is, we want the address of that. So this is just a really sort of what doesn't it like about that? Oh, because it's an int 8 and not a uint 8. Yeah, it's the same thing. I don't care in this case. I mean, it's not the same thing, but we don't care that it's not the same thing. Okay, so to recap this. So what we're saying is, when we loaded the sprite information from this, we've said, okay, there are these 3 tiles. The first one uses this palette file, this one uses that palette file, and that one uses that palette file. Excuse me. And then the code that we changed to add this palette index, what we had to do is we had to say, okay, we know that we're potentially conserving palettes by reusing these palette files that we've exported to the file system. And so we needed to save that somewhere. We don't actually need it for anything but runtime in order to see what that looks like, because ultimately all of this is getting converted over to the NES properly when we go to export the sprite. But the PC side of things doesn't really understand how that works. So let's see, did that crash or did that actually work? Let me run that in the debugger for the sake of seeing. I need the absolute path here, so all right, so let's see. Yeah, it crashed. That's what I kind of thought had happened. What's the problem? Indexed is garbage. SXSY palette. Oh, palette is null. Why is that null? Did it not load the initial sprite? It did. The initial sprite not load our palette? Palette is null. Oh, that's not supposed to happen. All right. Load sprite metadata. Oh, okay. Well, that explains it. So it's not actually loading the palette. So load palette. That would help. Sprite palette. I want to give it the address of that. This has gone through so many different little permutations here. Total positions. This is sprite. Sprite positions. No. Number of tiles. And then so I forgot that we're not actually loading the palette here, because previously it didn't matter because we didn't need that for the purposes of what we were doing. We were just relying on what was in the image. But now, because we're actually passing, well, we were relying on what was on the image and then sort of half-assed converting it to indexed and not taking into account the palette that was already in use. So, all right, so now what's the problem? Oh, probably it can't read the file because it's not absolute path anymore. So let's let's change this to be absolute path. Shooter. Assets, PNG. And then obviously there are still bugs in all of this because I'm still kind of figuring some of these things out. All right, so this is looking better because it did not crash this time. All right, so let's see here. What didn't it like about what we just did there? All right, so we've got 3 of those. The palette is loaded. Let's take a look at what that looks like. That looks okay if I'm remembering right, but let's actually look at the content and compare. E0 0B1020, good. E0 000F 0B. Okay, so that palette is right, and then we have zeros for the rest of it. That's fine. And so now we are converting our image indexed stuff to be the new, to use the new palettes. So oh, I see. So it's actually also haha. So the problem is that for all of the all of the image data that we're not using anymore, it's not touching that, which means it's not going to correspond to an appropriate value in the palette. But that's okay. That is actually solvable pretty easily, I think. One thing that I wonder about, though, is how many palette indexes, or indices if you prefer, are we making use of? Initial sprite positions. So that's palette index 0, palette index 1, and then that should also be palette index. Oh, that's palette index 0 also. It was player 0 pal, and then player 1 pal. Is that a bug? That's probably a bug. It's probably a bug. It's probably getting the wrong index. Let's see. So if we find it, the palette index is J. Otherwise, let's see. So if we are iterating through the first time through, palette index is 0, and we don't find it, it will be 0. And then the next time through, we won't find it, and it will be 1. And then the next time through, we will find it. And it should just be J, which I thought would be 1, but let's take a look at that. Well, let's do this. Let's set breakpoints at the appropriate spots. So the first time through, we didn't find it. The next time through, we didn't find it. The next time through, we did find it because the file matched. And J is what? J is 0, player 1. Oh, is there a bug in the way it's updating the list of palette names? There sure is, because we're not incrementing that, and that certainly helps. Okay, so that explains that. So now this should give us a proper palette index. So it found it, and it should be at 1. It is. Great. So now, we don't care about this anymore. Image indexed is getting updated. Palette index is 1, and then palette index should be 1 again. And that should give us something a little more likely here. Okay, really close. Because the bottom is closer than it was previously. Now, the interesting thing, let's take a look at the actual player.png here. Let's open it in Paint, just so we're not getting anything crazy happening here. So what is the reasoning behind what I'm seeing here? I'm seeing this drawn. So now it's like it's drawing the tiles, but with partially incorrect palettes. What's also interesting is that the palette that it's drawing with for the top is wrong, and the palette for the bottom is wrong. Even though that was previously getting an appropriate color, or at least a reasonably appropriate color. All right, let's take a look at this here. Well, you know what? We also changed some things. Let's re-export it without this, and then we'll regenerate it with the JSON file. Oh, oops. You know what? Okay, we've generated the raw sprite. Let's dump the metadata about the thing. Come on. All right, and so now let's do this, and then let's do that, and let's take a look at what the palette file looks like now, if the colors are the same or they're different. They look the same. I'm curious, so now if we... Okay, so that draws right now. So all right, there was obviously a problem there, but oh, you know what? We got to re-export this now with the new setup, and then okay. Oh, wait a minute. I got to fix that. The escaping is not working properly for this. It probably couldn't load this part of it properly. So let's try that again. Huh. Still don't see that blue color. And that was working before. So if we look at our palette here, we have E0, oh, should it be 0E? That should be 0E. stop it. I doubt that that actually broke anything, but that's okay. We can just get that fixed up here. Let's get this re-exported. You know what? I also want to check to make sure these are getting regenerated properly, because timestamp didn't reflect a change, but Windows is a little bit weird lately with that. Does not always show that the file changed. Let's add the absolute path there. And then let's take a look at if this is at all different. It is possibly. Not really. Okay. Well, oh, wait a minute. Why is it still E0? Damn it. Did I not? Oh, I didn't rebuild it. Blech. I didn't rebuild it because it was, I had to close it. All right, so let's execute that from here, so I don't have to re-type the palette file names when I do the export to JSON again. That's just a bug we gotta fix. That's why I don't like generating this kind of stuff by hand in code, and it's nicer when you have something where you've got an object that you can populate with it and have a library that actually knows what it's doing, generate your code. But under the circumstances, this is what we've got. Okay. This is better. Still wrong, but it's better. I wonder if it's because we're running out of colors because of the background. I think that's what the issue is. That's why we're not getting the blue color. And then why this is happening is beyond me right now. Let's take a look at this for a second. So when it is, I will be satisfied if we can get this to draw the whole thing with the somewhat correct colors. The bigger issue is that the background is messing up the number of colors we can draw, and we will have to fix that. So let's start with, how do I want to start? How do we want to start? How do we want to start? Guess I want to first figure out why this is not drawing what it's supposed to be correctly, forgetting about for a moment the fact that the colors in the palette are wrong. Let's start with that. So if we want to draw the sprite, we're going to go through the number of tiles. We're going to take palette 0 and yep, we're going to go through that whole thing. And then for each of these positions, we are going to take the sprite position and draw it. So let's start with, if I just take this and say, okay, we're just going to do 1. What we should see is just the top part of the ship with 1 pallet. Okay. So that's decent. It's still wrong, but that's more along the lines of what it should have been. Than what we're seeing here. So that would imply that the drawing of the additional tiles is what's causing this problem. So if I go and draw it this way, okay. Why is it drawing half a tile of the ship the wrong way? Position X plus is the sprite position not correct? Four zero. So that's the first one. And then the second one is at 8-0. So that looks okay. So it's position Y times the sprite width plus X is equal to, that's the same thing, the indexed temp, okay. Temp position X. It's incrementing it because we don't care. We just want to increment. Yeah. So that is strange. So if I say do this, it's drawing that, which is bizarre too, because that's not right. Is it just the why would it be drawing that there? I mean, at that point, it should be drawing, the position should be, oh, no. Okay. Okay, so this was just purely user error. But okay, that just proves that it does what it's supposed to do. I just wasn't paying attention. So let's oh, I gotta fix the loop here, but that is actually looking right now. So sorry about that, guys. That was silly. That was just user error on my part when I was modifying the tiles. I was sort of jumping the gun there, and then this should be 0. Thanks. Also, did you know some of those unused black colors are used on variations of NES hardware, like yellow color on the play versus play choice? I know that there are some colors that are used in different ways on the different varieties of hardware. I'm not I'm not sure what I want to do about that right now, but it technically is okay, I guess, that we're doing. I mean, the main thing is you're supposed to stay away from, what is it, 0D? Why is that still crash? I don't understand. Anyway, there's that black color that you're supposed to stay away from because it is it can create problems on actual hardware because it's like ultra black or some color that you're not supposed to use. Okay, so I swapped that for the background and then swap this. Oh, I can't do that there because yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I definitely want to disable the use of colors we don't want to have available. But right now, you know, I just kind of have the whole palette just for the sake of simplicity. But yeah, you're right. That would be something to keep an eye out for. So in the so in the color selector, this is the whole, I want the palette view is palette size right now. Okay, so this is not allowing for me to select anything beyond 4, I believe. So the X is, what is it? It's doing '64. They're plus 128. They're 32 by 32. So I want 16, so 512. So I can select all of them. Alright, so now I should be able to, barring the weird bug that I've got here in the way it's drawing, some of this stuff I should be able to why did that not update? Probably because it's not using the index in there, it's using the index in the, well, let's save that. And that should have updated the palette. And when we relaunch it, maybe, no. Didn't resave the palette. I thought it was supposed to, but we'll manually do that for now. Okay, and then that should be a darker gray. No. All right, what is the deal with this bug? What don't you like? Thread. What threading are you using? Is this something with... Is this something with my code, or is this something with Tiger? But who is calling you? I assume this is something that... It's weird because this problem comes and goes. I don't know that it's anything that I'm specifically doing directly. I mean, there may be some sort of... But I'm running it in debug, so you'd think that the Visual Studio thing... there are all these checks that it does for buffer overruns and stuff like that that should protect against any sort of issue I'm introducing there, but it's pretty weird. I'm seeing this happen more and more frequently, it seems. All right, let's go back to palette 0 for a second here. Are you gonna close and let me do something, Visual Studio? Thank you. So my plan here is just to modify the palette file in Fred for now. Okay, so right now, where is Fred? Palette 0 is going to be this, and then palette 1 is going to be the same, except that I want to swap that. E 00040B, which is what it's showing. Okay, so if I close that and now reopen, come on. I have to spend some time trying to figure out what's going on with this, or if it's maybe because I'm streaming it and the driver is doing something weird. I don't know. It's bizarre. All right, so that looks closer, and then I want to make, well, it's that's not exactly. That's bizarre. That's very strange. What? 0B. What color is it using for that? Is it not? Now when it's loading the sprite, is it not? It's possible that it is. Yeah, I guess that's possible. So view mode. It's possible that it is, when it's loading it to view the sprite, it is not handling the palettes properly still. Let's see. It might be trying to convert from the loaded palettes still instead of just using the fixed palettes. Review sprite. Load sprite. There's the load. Well, that shouldn't matter because when it was initially converted over, it should have been converted over using the... Oh, well, no. Because at the point that we were doing that, it should have converted the indexed based on the palette we selected. Let's see. Load image palette. I wonder if it's just because the background, the unused colors are causing a problem. I mean, what we can do is after we do this, we just basically go I to and then say if image index is greater than 3, which means it hasn't been converted to one of these indexed colors, then image indexed equals 0. Oh, yeah. I knew what I meant, but the compiler did not. And then this is going to be a problem because I'm already in. Wait, I don't need to do that here. I want to do that outside. Thank you. Okay, let's try that again. So let's do a conversion again and then look at that. Oh, okay. That's actually better. It's better. Yeah, that's actually much better. Because now I know what I'm looking at here. So, for example, I don't know why. Oh, I think I do know why that swapped incorrectly. Hold on a second. Let's see. If you right-click, swap indexing to the index. That's divided by 32. Let's see, if I'm pressing the right mouse button, I want to get the value of the index and then the swapped index. And swapped index is would I consider adding a tooltip to tell you the color or the color if you click on it? Yeah, I mean, I certainly could do something like that. Not sure I necessarily want to do that right this second, but yeah, that would probably be a good idea. I mean, I recently added the ability to even see what the values are of this thing, of these palette colors are. Let me go back to, where's paint? So that should be the lighter gray. Oh, actually, that's just that. Oh, darn it. Clicked on the wrong one. Try that again. So 20 is the color that I want for this to... Really? Oh, no, that's the highlight. Okay, so it's 10. Right, and then I want to swap that for the background, but that's busted. Why is that? Oh, is it because it's still making assumptions about the maximum number? It's possible. Here, don't do anything unless I actually click something, please. So if I... What is the index? It's 7. Is that big enough to... What is the size of the palette? Yeah, so that should be able to handle that. Swapped index. And then, so that's the index is 0. Now, oh no, that's not the index, that's the, so the index is 8. So it gets the value of that, and then it takes the swapped index, which is... That seems wrong. Why would it do that? If swap index, then swap index and -1. Palette index is equal to selected color. That's if you left click. Okay. So on the right click, it is taking the index. The swapped index is getting set to the one that it's swapping with. Okay, and so it's going to palette 0, which is wrong. Okay, so there are a couple of problems with the way that this is working. It's calculating things correctly, but not in the way that this is meant to work with the 4-color palette being extended. So we got to fix that. Let's see. So what we need to do is we want to keep that the same there, but we want to go to the nearest index. Well, it actually technically doesn't matter which one we're using there, but what does matter is the swapped index has to be modulo 4, because it can only be a 033 value to work correctly now. And then I actually don't care. What we'll need to do is update all of the color 0 locations. Yeah, hold on a second. Well, I guess I do care. For a few reasons. Okay, so that's wrong because it's changing the wrong one. Grr. Oh, this This turned out to be more complicated than I expected to be with this change. And keeping these palettes all in one array. Because I can't just modulo this by 4 now because it doesn't know which tile I'm referring to for that palette. And for the sprite, we do have that loaded, so we can figure that out. It's just, that's weird. I didn't expect that to be the problem. And then why that is causing it to redraw this like that is also a little bizarre. And I guess that's probably because probably get rid of most of this code at this point, because it's just cluttering things up. It's the image. Collisions. Palette view. Those are our buttons. So that's our palette, and then what we're doing is based on the index we're swapping. But that doesn't work now because it's not a universal palette across all of the tiles potentially. So the bottom line is that we could, the fix I made over here to modulo it by 4 would work if we were using one palette, but because we're not, it's not correctly updating the indexed image. Let me see something here. Just changing the color should work. Like if I just change this, this to that, that works because it's updating that palette, and then when we go and we draw the sprite again, it's drawing just these chunks. And the same thing with, if I take this, no, that's not going to work for, well, it'll work, but it won't, right? So it works in the sense that it updates this to be the right color, but that's the background color, which is no good. But anyway, so that's why that part works. But the problem is that you can right click on the color and it's supposed to swap the color for the background color. So like if I right click on this and swap it, you can see it swaps back and forth correctly for this part, but not for this part. And that's because of the problem I was talking about before. So what I need to do so what needs to happen is you have to, all right, so based on based on the right click, it's updating the palette properly, but then when it goes to update the image, it has to look at which palette you were in and which tile you were updating as a result of that. Basically only update the palettes that are, update the portions of the image that are within, that are using this palette 0 or palette set 0, sprite palette 0, whatever you want to call it. This turned out to be way more annoying than expected. Let me think about what the right thing to do here is. I think basically what we have to do is we have to, based on the swapped index, determine which palette all right, so let's start with this. So what we should see if we do swap to index divided by 4 is we should see which one we're actually referring to, right? So if I take this and just do the swap, that's doing what we wanted to. So now, instead of just iterating over the entire thing, what we need to do is we need to say, I'm going to switch that index in a second. So we want to say through sprite, current sprite, number of tiles, and then we want to say, okay, if current sprite, sprite positions I, palette index equals swapped index divided by 4. So if we're swapping a value that is within that palette range, then we want to do the actual swap. And the only way to do that is through the actual x and y. So we say y is not 0, y is let's alias this so I don't have to type out this whole long thing every time. Say temp position y, y is less than temp position y plus 8, temp y plus plus, or actually I prefer to do plus plus y. Okay, so int x is equal to temp position x, x is temp position x plus 8 plus plus x. Curly braces, please, not that, and then this becomes x plus y times 8. No. current image width. No. And then this, and this 0 should really be swapped index divided by 4, because we want it to be the 0 index that's in that. And that should make the swap work properly and consistently. Nope. Okay. Oh. Yeah, because this also needs to be oh, I did that. Not divided by 2. Well, yeah, that's the okay. That has to be mod 4. Why is that not behaving? Temp. Y is position Y to Y plus 8 plus Y. X is position X to X plus 8 plus X. X plus Y times current sprite width. If it's equal to swapped index, mod 4. Else if it's 0. Okay, let's try that. Blast. Still behaving wrong. If swap index is greater than 0. Greater than or equal to 0. Should just be greater than 0. There's no point in swapping 0 over and over again. All right, let's see what's going on here. I just swapped this. Swapped index is 3 divided by 4 should give us 0. So for this, Paladin, yeah, so that's that. And we're going to make that temp. And so what we're going to do is we are going to X plus Y times current width. We're just going to iterate over the image. And change the positions that match. So if this is so that's 2 and swapped index is 3, which doesn't match. So nothing happens there. And 0, nothing happens. Oh, it was 0, so we swapped it for swapped index. So we made it 3. Okay. Let's see when we get to the point that we're doing something beside 0. So the value is 3, swapped index is 3. So that seems okay. Now, the next time around, we shouldn't come back in here, basically, because the palette index should be 1, and the swap, yeah, so this shouldn't go through. Okay. We gotta get rid of that loop that's happening at the end there. That's not necessary. And then it redraws it. Okay. Let's draw sprite. All right. So that all looks okay. When we do the swap, it should just be changing the highlight with the green. But it seems like it's doing a lot more. I don't know why it's even touching that part. Draw sprite. NES palette, palette 0, palette index times 2. This is drawing using the palette index, so that should be okay. I mean, even if we so it looks like it's partially. That's so weird. Swapped index. There's our swapped index. It matches. I'm sure I'll figure this out. It's just kind of strange that this is behaving this way. The image is just an array of bytes because we're just looping through and doing a straight up. Oh, 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 no. Wait a minute. It's not just a straight up array of bytes. It is. The image is tile oriented, not image oriented. So it's times 8. I forgot. And then the only other thing we have to do is we have to take I and multiply by 64 to offset us into the appropriate tile. I should probably hold on a second. I'm gonna burn too many times in this series by not wrapping things in parentheses, and I know it should probably evaluate the bitwise without it, but better safe than sorry. Okay. Better. Still wrong, but better. Let's see. So now it's not updating the whole image. Let's see. The Y position. No. Okay. Right. No, no, dummy. If this is tile-oriented, then you're just iterating through the tile, 0 through 8. That position has no bearing on anything except for when we go to draw. All right, so let's see. Tile offset plus our x plus our y, and the x is 0 through 8, the y is 0 through 8. And I feel like we're just probably messing up the reassignment. So if, let's just say this is equal to 0. If the value let's just make that equal to 0. I want to see what that does. Okay, that's behaving more. That's actually behaving properly now. So now the question is, two questions. Why is it not updating that part of the palette view? Let's see. What triggers a redraw of the palette? There's no actual trigger. There is just palette size. It should just be drawing the whole dang thing. Oh, is it not getting updated properly? Palette 0, palette temp. Ah, that's what the problem is. Or a problem. I think palette data equals, let's see, palette data. Where's my palette data struct? Yes, this is the problem. This may also be causing some of the other weirdness we're seeing. So oh, come on, really? Times 4. So that was one of the problems, apparently. Not all of them. Palette data, palette size. Palette 0 is, what is this? What is this? Copying it to there. Okay. What is this one doing? This is a create sprite. That is okay. Here. This copy by 4 is okay. This write by 4 is okay. I think. Yeah, because it's just writing out the individual files. Load image palette. This is also okay. And that is okay. That is not our code. Let's see here. Are we going to actually see a palette swap over here? Y. Zero temp index. Palette view. Mem copy palette. Palette. Size of palette size, which is 16, right? It is. Palette is allocated 16 bytes. Let's go into palette size. That's times palette size. That is correct. That is copying the entire palette that's been swapped back. Okay. Current meta tile, current sprite palette. It is, oh, okay, so that's also a problem. So this should not be just doing this. This should be, I'm okay with 0 going, no, I take that back. That's okay. Because this is from 0 to 16. That's not a problem. Okay, so that should be okay. Why is it not actually doing a visible swap in... Hmm. 0B, put that there. Oh, it is changing it now. Oh, okay, I see. Because it was using actual index 0, so there was no visible change because it was not updating that one. Okay, so I do want to make it use the appropriate index 0 for that palette, just for the sake of my sanity, which is slipping away. All right, so then this should be swapped index divided by 4. Let's see if that... no, wait. That should still be 0. Because that's the local index, not the global index. No. Close. It's different. Index is... palette index is equal to... divided by 4. So if we chose, for example, 7, no. What would that be? 0, 1, 2, 3. So that would be, yeah, that would be 7. 7 shifted, that should... gives us that is, oh, that's right. That's telling us which offset we're using. That's not what I wanted. What did I want? Well, that's actually partially what I wanted. I wanted that. So I know this looks redundant. Why shift to right and then shift to left? But we're stripping bits off that we don't want, so that we end up with, what we'll end up with is 4, which is our actual 0 index that we want. It's the same thing as if you do like a divide by 2 and a multiply by 2 and with an integer, just faster. There we go. And then okay. And then if all goes well, that's our first palette. And our second palette is 0B 00 04 10. Let's save that. And when I save the sprite, it doesn't update the palette files, but if I reopen it, it looks correct. Finally. Okay. Now the question is, have I broken the export? And I don't think I have. So let's try it and see. Let's do it from here. All right, so actually let's dump all the stuff that's in here. Let's rerun this. And then let's go to, did I select everything? Let's go to here and replace. 33 files sounds right. Let's rebuild the assembly. Okay. And let's see what the ROM actually looks like if we load it. This should be interesting. Be prepared for some weirdness. All right, so it's not the kind of weirdness I was expecting. It looks like it loaded the first thing properly, but not the rest of the thing. Oh, right. You can't do that. You can't, we gotta re-export all this stuff now. Let's do this with absolute paths. I forgot, the whole sprite format, or not the whole sprite format, but the sprite format changed a bit, so can't just re-export the whole map and expect it to work. It's madness. What am I looking at here? So projects, shooter, assets, PNG, bullet dot PNG, bullet dot JSON. Now I have, those should not have changed, right? I don't have that, so let's just export that. All right, so that's that one, and then This one we need to definitely change the thing. So explode that sprite so it's animated, and then I'm not sure how it. Well, I am sort of sure. Well, I'm not going to worry about that right now. I've spent a lot of time on this already today. I just want to get this working. So that's that. Let's take a look at the bullet. That needs to be swapped. And then so those two are good. And all right, so that means we've got sprites exported now. So now if we export, things should be looking a little bit better. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Let's re-export that. Let's reassemble the code and see where we're at now. Okay. I guess the meta tiles likely have changed as well. Let's see, meta tile. Blue tile, green tile, bumper, and then we should be able to so this may be something we have to pick up on the next stream. I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to be able to solve this here tonight. I'm going to try, but there are obviously a number of interesting issues that have been created as a result of this change. We're gonna have to dig in and see what they are. Just went through the process of re-exporting everything. All right, so we're okay. So it's in better shape than it was before. The sprites are still kind of weird for the player. And I'm not sure. We can look and see why that is. It is trying to draw the player. But it is very flickery. The explosion worked fine. It seems like the process of drawing the player is actually the issue. Everything else seems more or less fine, actually. Why is that? Draw player sprite. That all looks okay. That's weird. It even seemed like it slowed down when the player, until the player was, actually I don't know if that's true or not. Let's wait and see until when the enemies come in, how they look. Any moment now. Okay, what's going on? Is it, am I trying to, oh, am I trying to update the sprites too much? Is it drawing all the sprites? Let's see. It does appear to be trying to draw explode over and over again. Do I still have that script? I wonder. I had written a, although I don't know if it even works anymore. I had written a Lua script to draw all the game sprites on the actual window. I don't think this works anymore. Oh, that's not that script. Where is it? Yeah, the memory location is different. Hold on a second, and I will make this start up properly. Whoa, 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 whoa. What you doing? I can't read. Well, everybody can read that now, but that's way too big. Okay. So the entity buffer is, I believe, at what is it at? 800. Base address should be 800, I think. Let me go into the debugger and look at the code. Oh, it's at 100. Okay. My mistake. Okay, so there's just the player sprite, and then... Oh, is the problem... I wonder if the problem is that explode is entity 0. And so it is actually trying to draw literally every... That could be it. That is not it. At least it doesn't look like that. No entities. Explode is entity 1. Wow, Okay, what is... Let's take a look at the disassembly here. What I don't understand is... the timing of this is very bizarre. And then if I get rid of the player sprite, then... now everything is out of sync, but... so if I go to memory viewer, and I go to 100, and I make this 0, suddenly everything works a whole lot better. And this wasn't a problem until I updated this code, and like even the enemies are drawing better, so that's a little odd. If I add the player back in now, we can see it kind of flickering in. All the rest of the entities are 0. That's the animation code for the explosion, which shouldn't be called because, here, let's just for the sake of ensuring that that's not the problem, let's rebuild it with no explosion code enabled. It's like, oh, okay. Sorry, my bad. That was not loading the entity type, so it was just taking whatever the X register had in it. All right, so it's still not drawing the player properly. Why is that? Draw player sprite. 40. Tile index 22. Tile index 23. That all seems right. I am... if I just get rid of the explosion code here for a second. I mean, it may have nothing to do with that, and it will have no impact. Let me make sure this is actually the code we're trying to build. Okay, yes. So, okay, that had no impact. It's really strange. That this is now suddenly not working because of this change to... So the question is, what data changed about the sprite okay, wait a minute, I know what the problem is. So for the player, I think I'm assuming that there is collision data. And I would guess, if I had to, that that's the problem, is that there are no collision points defined. Actually, I don't need to do it that way because we got that fixed. And it's probably not very happy about that. So let's re-export. There must be a bug that it's assuming that there's at least one collision point, and if there isn't, it's messing something up. That's the only thing I can think of, because I hadn't included that in the latest version of that sprite, and that matters for the player, but not for the other sprites, which were working fine. So let's see if that suddenly makes things work normally. Yep, there it is. Okay. Helps if the emulation speed is normal. Okay. So where we are right now is now the palettes are wrong in the sense that we're not getting palettes we should have from, we're just getting grayscale essentially. And that's because the palettes that are in use are just kind of bogus for the player, it looks like. We can fix that. So let's see. So if we go back to, obviously this is not the solution to the problem. I'm just verifying that at least the data is right once we fix the palette. So the first part of it, let's see here. Oh, it literally, okay. We just have too many palettes, which is fine because we knew that that was a possibility. Okay, this all makes sense now. It's not great, but we're at a point now where in the export process we will be able to handle the palettes correctly. We are getting the data such that the ship at least looks reasonably good. Still have to figure out what to do about the background transparency situation, because obviously that's not working 100%. Where's explode? At this rate, I could have just typed it. So we could swap like that and save, and then if we re-export and build, and now each step of what we're doing here will become something that I don't have to touch by hand when we make changes. It'll just, we change the image and rebuild, re-export and rebuild, and it'll look correct. But obviously I have to, you know, that's what we're working on here. That didn't fix that, but that's down to the problem of the fact that the background color, that's down to the fact that there's some issues with the way that it's treating the background color when we initially do the export from PNG. Because it's grabbing, it's treating some of the colors incorrectly, and so that's why we get these weird behaviors. And realistically, we should be able to fix that so that the background color is handled properly, and then we have colors across the board, because right now this thinks that there are multiple palettes that it should be using, because technically it's too many colors, but it's not, because if you look at the PNG, the background is again throwing it off. There was a suggestion to use an actual transparency for the background to fix this and just key off of that. I have to look at how that gets treated by the PNG library, because I don't think it actually understands. So yeah, so it's treating this as 1, 2, 3, 4. It's treating this as 5 colors because there's a background color plus the white plus this. It doesn't know that white is the background color. So that's what I've got to fix next. Because we want it to use the white color for that. I got to look. So for just to recap, for those of you who don't know, I'm using this Tiger library for the PNG decoding and the drawing routines. And I don't know that it actually understands the transparency. We can take a quick look before we wrap up for the evening here. So if we do a load here, let's see, it does understand paletted. My guess, though, is that it will... I expect that it's probably clobbering the transparency. Let's see. Kind of hard to tell. I also have to look at how PNG stores the transparency, because I don't remember. I looked at the spec a while ago and wrote my own PNG decoder, but I also wasn't handling no, get out of here. I was also not handling the transparency. Oh, is it an alpha channel? For indexed images, it stores alpha channel values for one or more palette entries. For true color grayscales, it stores a single pixel value that is to be regarded as fully transparent. Okay. Well, I'll have to look into this. I don't see anything in there for it, but it doesn't mean it's not doing it. Actually, if it's not looking at that chunk, yeah, it's not using that chunk type, so it doesn't support, it's likely not supporting transparency at all. So just taking whatever colors there are and ignoring transparency. So that's kind of a pain. I mean, if I got to look at how this works, if that's the case, then it might actually be easier to, instead of taking the indexed, if it's, yeah, so basically if what we're reading here is accurate, if we're using an RGB or grayscale image, we could just key off that RGB or grayscale image pixel value for the ones that are transparent and regard that as the background for our indexed version of the image. If we're using indexed images, then it's going to store, it looks like, multiple things. I have to look. I'll have to research that a little bit, and then we'll see if we're going to take that approach or what we're going to do. I mean, that would be the ideal thing, because if it understands transparency, then there's no guessing, and then we wouldn't have this problem. So anyway, that's it for tonight. This is a long one. Anyway, thank you for watching. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to message me on Twitter at Clairvis. I also will post the recording on YouTube. You can post comments and questions, and I'm on Nintendo Age as Zelius. There are also lots of other smart people on the Discord there and in the forums who have been programming NES for far longer than I have, and may be able to answer your question better than I can, but, you know, don't hesitate. And I know I've said this a million times, 0 Pages, episode 3, promise soon, very soon, it will be done. A bunch of the voiceover is done. The content is mostly done, and I'm just having a hard time finding the time to wrap it up. Hey, CPP Chris. Thanks for thanks for lurking. So anyway, have a good night, and see you Thursday on stream, and see you later online. Take care.